Welcome everybody back to Business Monday here at Go Local Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO of Go Local. With me is Nick Hemond, Chairman of the Providence School Committee, lawyer extraordinaire. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Josh.
Appreciate you coming in. Listen, Rhode Island gets ranked CNBC as the 50th ranked state for doing business. I think it's only appropriate that folks involved in education are talking about what we need to do to improve not just Providence schools, but statewide school scores and output, because it's adversely impacting our economic viability as a state. Where are we right now in this review of the Providence school system? Can you recap for us a little bit?
Sure. So we await the word from the State Department of Education and the Commissioner as to what their intervention strategy is going to be in Providence. Clearly, we're about to embark on a multi-year process that is going to be very different than the structure that we have been operating in for many, many years. And in that, if you're looking at it from what's good for the economy sort of perspective, is this all designed to bring about real change? And it's change that can't happen within the structure and all the disjointed aspects of the governance structure in the school system. And it's an opportunity. If you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you're a principal, and if you're a student, all of the things that you believe get in your way of success at any part of that, at any level of your involvement in the school district, now is the time to talk about how to tear it down, how to get around it, how to go under it, how to go over it, whatever the strategy will be. This is an opportunity like we've had never before. And while, when we've seen whether it's receivership with a municipality or a takeover of a particular school system, I don't think you're getting the resistance in the city now to say, let's fight the state on this, because we just want to see improvement. In my private life, I deal with a lot of businesses and trying to bring businesses to the state. And having a good, strong school system beyond classical high school is extremely important to the future of our state.
It was funny, in the proposal to GE that the state made, 4 years ago, in competing with Boston and some other markets, when they compared education, they actually used Moses Brown School as the case study for what the quality of our education was. They sort of bypassed Providence schools. Listen, we don't need to recap what the condition of Providence schools are. I think it's been well vetted. It's become a little bit of a national embarrassment when the Wall Street Journal's writing about you. The worry is that I think for many folks who've been around a while, this isn't the first rodeo on this issue. This entire process took place in the early 1990s, and there was lots of energy and lots of excitement, and then it petered out and nothing happened. If you talk to folks who are directly involved with it, they said, hey, listen, in their mind, those folks will say the unions just wore them out, that the unions can pick and choose based on that contract what they're going to go along with, and that they can say, listen, we don't agree with that, and the contract says we don't have to, and now with evergreen contracts it can go on for almost forever, on infinita, based on the legislation that passed last year. How do you bypass that? How do you get the unions? Mary Beth Calabro is a smart woman. How do you get them to be a partner? How do you make it in the best interest of the faculty at these schools to be able to push a process forward?
So all of this has always been by negotiation. And while this is a drastic step in change in Providence, it's not the final step, because if we can't get this process to work out under the Crowley Act, there's far more severe actions that can be taken. Bankruptcy, receivership. Nobody wants that.
Right.
Parents, taxpayers, parents, teachers, nobody wants that. So it's in everybody's incentive to work together. Now, in fairness to the Providence Teachers Union, they've been a great partner with the school board. We don't negotiate their contracts financially, but from a programmatic perspective, whenever we've wanted to try something different, they've been a willing partner. But we all said to Aaron, well, we want them to do more training. We want them to work longer hours. We want them to work a longer school year. We want them to come in early, stay late. Well, that's fine, and many of them want to do that, but you have to pay them for it. And we've not allocated our resources in these negotiations over the years to say, well, we need this programmatically, so we're going to give you this financially. And what business works that way? And while government is not a business, people are still people. And if you put out there something that these people who come to work in difficult environment every single day for not a ton of money, if you give them something that's worth it, that taps into their passion and shows them a path to success, and you give them a carrot at the end of that and compensate them for it, I think you're going to have a willing partner. But it's not in their interest either to just be obstinate and dig their heels in, because, as I mentioned earlier, there's another step beyond this process, and it's not good for anybody.
So the process, as we understand it right now, is tomorrow night, Tuesday night, the Board of Education for the state of Rhode Island is going to vote to take this next step. It's not yet completely defined. I think everybody has a good idea of it, that somebody's going to be appointed to oversee Providence schools, that lots of the decision-making will shift from City Hall and the school board over to the commissioner's office, but not everything. The Providence School Committee is still going to be in place. You're still going to be the chairman of it, and
Sure.
until you have better sense.
Listen, you and I have talked about this before. In my interview to be on the school board in 2011, it was all in the backdrop of the legislative change that gave the mayor the power to negotiate the school contract.
Right.
And my predecessor had resigned over that. And when I was asked whether I supported that at the time, I said, well, yeah, I mean, I would have just gotten rid of the school board altogether. And I don't say that because the work isn't hard or the commitment's not there, but you just can't have a disjointed functioning system. And my opinion of that has revolved, because I think, if you have a strong school board, you can have the school board negotiate the contract. If you don't, then you need the mayor to do it. You can't predict either of those situations. So it just seems that while we're doing this, we might as well get our structure right. And, it's not about necessarily it's not an overseer. We don't need a babysitter because you're just adding a layer to a bureaucracy that's already in place. You're empowering somebody, and again, I don't have all the details on it, but what I do understand is someone or some entity is going to be empowered with the ownership of everything. And that is not something that exists now. And that person is going to have more power and authority, I would imagine, when you invoke something like the Crowley Act, than the school committee does, than the mayor does, than the city council does. And that is much different. And that person's going to be able to tear it all down, build it all back up, and then 3-4 years from now, hand it over to something that resembles
So let
local
me
control.
ask you a question. Is the school department budget going to leave the city's oversight? Is it going to shift to be a state budget?
I don't know. I don't think that. I don't think they're looking to replicate Central Falls. I think they're trying to learn from the struggles in Central Falls. There are just so many different things. People don't realize we don't own our buildings. The city of Providence owns the school buildings. So when we want maintenance, we have to call public works, or public property rather, and ask them to come in and do it. How that changes when it's not purely academic or purely educational, I don't really know. We've become much more involved in sort of what issues need to be addressed when you supplant the existing system. And those are details that, if they haven't worked out already, certainly will help them work out. But I don't know. There's going to be a legal challenge to this somewhere. It's not going to come from the mayor's office. It's not going to come, I would imagine, from the council or the school department. But there's going to be some challenge out there to some aspect of this. And those details are going to have to be very strong. And I know they have very smart lawyers working on this, and I'm sure that they're figuring all that out.
Not that there's any cynicism anywhere in Rhode Island, but I'm going to be the voice of cynicism for the purpose of this interview. In the mid-1990s, Mayor Lizzie of Central Falls took him a number of years, but finally convinced the end of Bruce Sunderland, the beginning of Governor Lincoln Almond, for the state to intervene and take over the Central Falls School Department. And the hope was, one, that there would be some economic improvement because of the amount that the state was already reimbursing the city for, but that a broader, more expertise, more resources would help improve the Central Falls School Department. Now, if Providence is considered one of the worst school systems in the United States, Central Falls, which has been under state management for 25 years, has 40% lower test scores, according to the RICAS, both in English, ELA, and in mathematics. That's even below the worst school system in the United States. How do we avoid that? Why should the average parent who sends their child to a Providence school feel comfortable that state control over this system? And listen, the new commissioner is dynamic. She's articulate. She seems to listen to everything everybody says. But if there's a bureaucracy that's unmovable at the city level, there's an equal bureaucracy at the state level.
Sure.
How does that progression take place?
I think importantly, they have no intention of running the school district out of RIDE.
So
That's
who's going
be
to run
clear
it?
to me.
Who's going to run
There-
this thing?
You know, again, what they come up with is not going to be simply the people that work for the school district at 797 are now reporting to the people downtown at RIDE. I would imagine they're going to put in a structure, and I don't have all these details, other than that they have told me they don't want to run Providence schools out of RIDE. I think you're going to see the board, the mayor, and the council taken sort of out of the way. And for our part, my part, we're happy to do that, because all we want to see is this work. I mean, we all have, the 9 of us have many, many reasons not to be on this board anymore. And the struggle, and again, I didn't say, oh, great, here comes the state. My reaction initially was, well, you have a school district, and your school district doesn't outperform us. But I realized, I think we're dealing with, as we went through it and we were having these conversations, the intent is different. The commissioner, I think, knows sort of the pitfalls of Central Falls and what we don't want to see happen. What I do think we have to be cautious about as we go down this is Gina Raimondo won't always be the governor, and Commissioner Infante Green won't always be the commissioner. So you got 3 years to really figure this out with an exit strategy.
Yep.
Because the next governor who comes along might not be someone who values what we're trying to do here in the city, who values English language learners, who values the challenges that we have, who may be far more hostile towards the good people that work for our
Or
district.
after 3 years, it may not be showing the level of progression after an investment.
And that's why it's everyone's incentive to do everything you can to make this work, because they're taking ownership of it now. And if it doesn't work, the people taking ownership of it now are going to be the ones everyone's pointing at, saying, hey, you tried it this way and it didn't work. So
Listen, I don't think there's anybody who doesn't want to see massive improvement in the Providence School Department. But I do also think that it's the obligation of parents, teachers unions, the media, to ask questions about this process, and that there be clear understanding of what the process is. One of the things you had told me previously, which is almost incomprehensible to the average person, is that over your years as chair, you've had almost no interaction with the woman, Barbara Cottom, who chairs the State Board of Education. Wouldn't it be, listen, she's a smart woman. She's been in government for many, many years. She worked for Mayor Joseph Paolino. She worked for Governor Bruce Sunland. She's been an executive at Citizens Bank. She's gotten these test results. Her tenure mirrors your tenure as chair. Why wasn't she instigating some analysis improvement over these past 5 years? Have you ever seen her at a Providence school?
I've never been with her at a Providence school. I've met with her on one occasion.
In 5 years as chair?
Has she been the chair for 5 years? I wouldn't
I
even
believe
know.
so.
So I've been the chair for like 4 years.
Okay.
We met one time, and it was in response to talk of this sort of thing 2 years ago under Ken Wagner. And, we pushed back at that time to say, listen, all of our wins are together. And if you think that the school district reporting to the RIDE board versus the school board is the end all, that wasn't the case. Let's work together. And then, I think if she runs her show any way we do, we're not educational experts. We're just community advocates that are trying to bring our talent to the table and what we can do to help superintendents and commissioners do their thing. And then the commissioner at the time and our superintendent, they started having some conversations, and nothing came of it. And that was my hesitation as we walked down this path is, I try not to be jaded. And I had to work through that. And there are probably people out there that work in the school district that have that same reaction, say, oh yeah, here they come. But I really do believe the intent, and certainly the action behind the intent, is different than it was in '93.
One of the things that I think is I think frustration for some folks is, listen, everybody could see the test scores. There was no lack of press coverage of absenteeism of faculty, conditions of certain school buildings, etc. You knew it. You were worried about it. Was the mistake that from Barbara Cottom to you, to every member of the school committee, to any influencers, that they weren't literally pulling Khrushchev, banging on it and saying, hey, listen, this is an emergency here in Providence?
Sure. So I think we did a good job of advocating on the facilities issue. It just took a long time for us to have the right decision makers in place to do it. But when I started, there was no state reimbursement. That had been suspended. The
Right.
city wasn't bonding. Now we have the reimbursement. Now we've got a 10-year formula.
And a bond got passed at the statewide
so
level.
we made progress there. I mean, we took reporters in. I complained to you.
Yep.
That we did a good job there. What I think we're guilty of is, I think we all go in there gung-ho, change the world. And then you see how hard it is. You see that when you go in a classroom, and one thing that I remember being a student, when the superintendent walked in the room, we all sat up straight, and even if we didn't like our teacher, we tried to not make the teacher look crazy in front of the superintendent. When I would go into classrooms, it would be with the superintendent, and they would say, here's the superintendent. There'd be no change, and if that classroom was not in control, it would continue that way. And that reflects on bad classroom management, but then there'd be people that, we're working hard, and you see what they go through, and you just see the problems, and you try, and everyone's trying to work together, and you don't become desensitized to it. You may empathize with it too much. I think that's where we get bogged down in the idea that everybody sees what we see and everybody knows what we know, and we're not, on the superintendent more to say, why haven't the scores moved? And he looks at you and he says, why the scores haven't moved. And that's why I say, we've tried our best. It has not worked. We now have a new opportunity, and we have to take advantage of it. And our role is to be the advocate. And I will tell you this, that I don't know what the role of the school board is going to be. I don't know if it's something that, I continue on or anyone on this board continues on with. But if there is an opportunity to advocate for students throughout this process, that it not be more of the same, I would be very excited to serve in that, even if it just purely is an advisory sort of thing, because that's why I started down this path in the first place, was to advocate for students, to get them what they need, to advocate for teachers, to get them what they need, and to advocate for building leaders, because it's not that complicated. Good principal, good teacher in every room, I like your chances.
A couple quick things. One is, there's been some discussion by some folks of an elected school committee. From my standpoint of seeing the influence of being on the city council years ago, but I think that the unions have and are good at impacting elections. They're good at organizing, they're good at funding, etc. That would seem to be a major shift in the balance to allow the unions to really influence the elections and de facto be in control of both labor and management. Do you have thoughts on that?
So I just don't see why the solution to the problem would ever be to introduce more politics into governing of schools. I think elected school committees...
There's no correlation across the country between...
I don't see why we have them. Maybe small towns is different, but in cities like this, I just don't see how I would be better at doing my job by having political fundraisers and having an incentive. And again, this is what's wrong with politics. Right now, my incentive is to work the divide that exists between the executive and the legislative and try to build a consensus so that we have a good school system for the kids. I think we do a good job of bridging that. We just don't get the result of a good system. But we can't solve our problems with a school board that gets along with the mayor, that has consistent vision with the mayor, that gets along with the council, has a consistent vision with the council. We're all on the same page for the most part, and we can't get it done. So to introduce more politics to that, I just don't see why it would be a good idea. I mean, we go out into the schools, we meet in the schools, we hold community forums. We're happy to be responsive. We're happy to be culpable to the community. You don't have to be elected to be able to do that.
Last question. Is part of the problem in Providence is that many of the most influential, affluent residents in the city have quit the Providence school system over the decades. They send their kids to parochial schools and private schools and de facto diminish the influence and the power of parents who want to advocate for a better educational system.
The example that I could give